What's going on, USG fam? Welcome back to the Uncommon Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Noah Weiss, and I'm so excited to bring you this conversation featuring Tim Griffin, the current Dean of Students, University Pastor, and Vice President of Student Affairs at Grand Canyon University. Tim wears a lot of hats over at GCU, and prior to his roles at Grand Canyon, Tim was the chaplain for NASCAR for 10 years, and prior to that served as a lead pastor at a number of churches. In this conversation, Tim and I talk about what led him to get into full-time ministry and how he obeyed that calling. We also talk about his time serving as the NASCAR chaplain, what that role looked like, and what his specific approach to ministry was like with such a unique people group as the NASCAR industry. And then we talk about his transition to Grand Canyon, going from ministering to NASCAR drivers and pro athletes to ministering to Gen Z and to students, and how his approach had to shift and what that transition looked like. I think this conversation will be very beneficial for you as you're seeking to understand how can you be doing intentional and practical ministry in your position working in college and pro sports. Before we dive into the conversation, I do want to call attention to the 2025 and third annual Christians Working in Sports Conference happening on July 11 to 12 in Atlanta, Georgia. As a reminder, we are partnering with 80s for Christ, another Christ-centered sports ministry, to put on this year's conference at Passion City Church. We're so excited to bring together believers from across the industry for a time of fellowship, connection, reflection, and ultimately growth through wonderful speakers and panelists in worship. If you are interested in joining this group and being a part of this conference, tap the link in the description of this podcast to register and become a part of the CWS community and be at the conference this year in Atlanta, Georgia. Without further ado, here is this week's episode of the Uncommon Podcast featuring Tim Griffin. Podcasts are pretty common. So what makes the Uncommon Podcast uncommon? Well, it's all in our name. I'm your host, Noah Weiss, and we at Uncommon Sports Group understand the unique pressures and temptations that come with a career in the sport industry. We provide uncommon training that helps you successfully navigate common challenges. Hit the follow button on this podcast. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Check out our website and become uncommon. Tim, it's great to have you on the podcast with me today. I was just saying off the air that it's been something I've been wanting to do for a while, but haven't been as proactive in, but I appreciate you being here. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it, Noah.
Yeah, it should be a great conversation. And Tim, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is about your career in ministry, and you've dedicated a lot of your career to being in ministry, which I think is something that is such a blessing that the Lord has called you into that, and an encouragement of how you responded to that for a large portion of your career. You've been serving previously as the chaplain for NASCAR until 2010, and since then have been the university pastor and even the dean of students at Grand Canyon University. So my question is, what really inspired you to pursue full-time ministry?
You know, I kind of fell into it, to be honest with you. I don't know that the way God led me into vocational ministry was like a lot of others who have a story where they heard the Lord call them into a certain lane of ministry. For me, I was an athlete trying to figure out how to follow Jesus, and I wasn't all that smart. And so I felt like, God, you're going to have to be very clear with me. And so I was the first one at the front of the line to volunteer. And so when I came to Christ and was trying to figure out how to follow Jesus, it was like, Lord, I don't know what you want me to do, but if you open a door, I'm going to walk through it. And so that was literally my commitment. And I didn't know if that would lead me to ministry, to missions, to, some other field or industry. But as God would have it, he led me to go on staff at my home church where I'd come to Christ. And that was my first step into vocational ministry. It was a part-time job. I was a senior in college, and I started working at the church. I did any job that they had for me. And so that's how I kind of got started. And so along that journey, I was like, God, I don't know what you want me to do. I don't feel comfortable speaking in front of people. So I don't know about this pastoring thing. I don't know that I'm really good with, lost people or people that are outside of the church. So being a missionary, I don't even know if that's for me, but I'll do whatever else you want me to do. And it's just funny the way it unfolded.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so awesome. I've heard countless stories of how people get into ministry and the different paths that God opens. It's amazing where he leads us. And oftentimes it may be even in an area where we're not comfortable or where we may think, my skills aren't necessarily aligned in this area, but he uses us there. And it's so cool to see, obviously, how you've persevered over the years and he's allowed you to be in the position you are now, opening those doors for you. And I can even relate to my story as well of my first opportunity in ministry. It wasn't something I received in a dream or a vision or anything that was very obvious, but the door did open. And I think it was, I'm sure similar to you, a step of faith that required saying no to some other good opportunities, but really being in a position where you were able to serve the Lord in an awesome field. So encouraged by that. One of the coolest opportunities you've had, at least from my view in your career journey, is serving as the chaplain for NASCAR. That is super cool. There's not many people that can say they've done that. What a unique and exciting opportunity to minister to that group of individuals. Talk about how that role came about. And for those that may not really understand chaplaincy or even NASCAR, what were your ministry responsibilities while serving as the chaplain for NASCAR?
You want me to start at the front end or the back end?
Either way.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I had no background in motorsports whatsoever. It was a different kind of sport. I grew up in Southern California, so I was a stick and ball sports kind of guy. Even though there were motorsports around, Southern California, it really wasn't the area of interest that I had personally.
Yeah.
So I have pastored for 12 years, pastored 3 different churches.
Wow.
And before I assumed the lead role in my first church, I had met a guy who had a real passion for motorsports. And he was a crosstown pastor, a missions pastor at a large church. And I was assuming the pastorate of a church plant that had been struggling along, and the founding pastor left after about 1.5 years or so. And so we were there helping with the church plant. And so it kind of fell to me. I was, one of the young guys that was involved with the church plant. And they said, well, are you interested in taking over? At the time I was working for Youth for Christ as a fundraising advisor. And so I thought, man, I've never pastored before, but okay, I'll assume this responsibility. So I don't know what I was doing. I was trying to get this church on its feet, and a mutual friend introduced me to this missions pastor, and he said, you guys need to get together. They have some resources that could help you with your church, your church plant. And I said, great. I need chairs. I need money. I need bodies, guitars. I need everything to kind of help this thing move along. And so I called him. His name was Max. And I said, Max, can we meet? Dennis gave me your name, who is our mutual friend. And so we met for lunch. And he said, we can help you. We've got plenty of resources at our church. We'll help you with something that you need. And he goes, listen, I'm not going to be here very long. I'm leaving in a few months I'm moving to Daytona to start a ministry to NASCAR. And I said, what? He said, yeah. He said, you want to go with me? I mean, my first meeting with this guy, we're having lunch. And I said, Max, thanks for the invite, but, I feel like I need to be here for this church. But thanks. He said, all right. He said, I'll check in with you, but I'll make sure you get connected to the church that he was serving at that time. So we did. We got connected, and he went off to Daytona and started this ministry, and I was pastoring away. And so for the next 12 years, I ended up pastoring 3 different churches. And every year he would come and find me to share about his ministry within motorsports, what
Wow.
God was doing.
Hmm.
And every year he would say, "Are you interested in coming to work?" I said, "Max, but no, I'm serving here. I'm doing this." And so for whatever reason, we hit it off. And I think he thought, Tim could do this. He might really enjoy it. He might be good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw something in me I did not see in me. And that was that I could fit in that world.
Hmm.
So in my last year of my third pastorate, so it was the beginning of my 12th year as I'm looking back on it,
Mm-hmm.
and he started getting me plugged in to doing weddings of racers. I started leading a couple Bible studies with racers that were in my area in Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of got me connected to the world of racing.
Wow.
And I started doing these one-off ministry opportunities, and I fell in love with the people. Honestly, I just fell in love with people that raced. And they were not unlike other athletes who were unchurched and outside the reach of the local church because of their schedules, the way they compete, the way they practice, the way they have to build their lives, which is not 9 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Right.
And so there was no church pretense. They didn't know how to pretend to be Jesus followers. If they were, they were figuring it out. If they weren't, you knew straight up that's not what they were about.
Oh yeah.
And I absolutely loved it. And, I go to church and people know how to play church and play Christian. And, it kind of, they learn the lingo, but man, not, you get what you see in here.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like so real and transparent. The words overused, but they were just authentic in the way they lived their lives and, what they were about. And I just felt like I didn't have to cut through a lot of religiosity with them. They were just trying to figure out how to race and be successful. And they had this interest in spiritual things.
Yeah.
And God was giving me opportunities with them. And so that's kind of how it started for me.
That's amazing. It's amazing to me just the way that God does lead us. You mentioned initially that offer came, like, I don't know if that's really where I'm supposed to be yet, but slowly the doors just kept opening and the pushing towards that. What a cool thing. And even the fact that you've never really grown up around racing or weren't a racing fan, it wasn't like you were really excited to, dive into this world that you loved and knew really well. And so I think that is super cool. I did want to kind of dive in with you about some of those chaplaincy responsibilities, because I think even for myself, it can be hard to picture, like you're a NASCAR chaplain, is that even a full-time thing? Like, how does that work? Obviously it is, right? And that was a big part of your career. So talk about that with the drivers day to day, at the big events like, Daytona 500 and the others. How did you interact and engage with that community?
Well, when I first started, I was pastoring a church full time. And so I got into these little one-off opportunities, Bible studies, maybe being chaplain for a weekend at a particular race event. And so I was just kind of learning the culture, which meant learning their language, learning their traditions, learning their heroes, their values. So I was kind of getting introduced to it. So I knew the church world, and kind of the traditions there, but I didn't understand what it meant to go to the track and to be at the track and to be at practice or qualifying or the actual race. And so it was a whole new world. It was like being a missionary in a sports event. And so the first thing that Max really modeled for me about the ministry within motorsports, and it's probably cliche in the world of chaplaincy, but the way it was described to us was it was hangout ministry. You just got to learn to go and be present and just hang out with, the teams, the crew members, the drivers, media people, whomever were a part of that event, and just hang out. And if you were there and you were present, it was the first step towards creating an opportunity to do ministry.
Yeah.
And so when I was pastoring, just to step into their Bible studies, to step into the track, just to be present in their world versus expecting them to come to my world, was the first major lesson that is so obvious.
Yeah.
But for those of us that are church people, we've got our own turf,
Yeah.
our own building, our own program, our own traditions, and we want people on the outside of the faith to come to our deal. And for me, the great lesson was, no, you got to leave your world and go to them and embed yourself in their life.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't do it as a full-time pastor, but I could do it in these one-off moments. And when I was there, things would happen. A car would crash, a boat would flip, a guy on a motorcycle would crash and break a limb, and I'd be at the hospital with him. Just something would create a ministry opportunity that I wouldn't have been available to had I not been present. And so then I started learning that if you just show up, God's going to open a door.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, that was the one great lesson. If you're going to be impactful in motorsports, you got to be there because things happen at the track where they're living, where they're working, where they're playing. And you have to be in their world in order to be available when that moment erupts. Yeah. And it's a ministry open door. So that was the first great lesson. And I started out in motorcycle stuff, and then that migrated to some other things that I did that ended up leading me into the NASCAR world.
That's so cool. I love that you talked about ministry of presence, because I think that can be hard for myself and a lot of people to be patient and just be around and get to know people and shake hands and small talk and get to know, like you mentioned, what are the things they like? What are the things that kind of make them go and talk and get excited, and just being a really trust-building individual by having those conversations and building rapport. I think that's so important. And even in our individual ministries with friends or coworkers or family members that may not know Christ, I think that can be a great lesson we apply to our ministries that we're with as well. So I think that's an incredible point to make. I'm curious about this world of NASCAR. What were some of the biggest, maybe personal and spiritual challenges that these drivers faced, and how did your ministry help support them through those spiritual and personal challenges?
Well, like any professional sport, once you get on the backside of it and you're in it, you start understanding the challenges, the stresses that people on the outside may not see. When you're watching it from the stands, or you're watching on TV, it's spectacular, it's exciting, it's exhilarating. And then you get, at least in motorsports, you get behind, the pit road, you get back behind the garage, and you see the tears and the brokenness and the loss and the exhaustion that comes with trying to be competitive and successful, and how it takes people to their breaking point, emotionally, financially, professionally. And so, that was my introduction to professional sports was in terms of being embedded was in motorsports, and I knew nothing about it. And so when you get to the track, and I was really self-conscious about standing in the wrong place because there's moving cars. It's a busy, busy space. And you can't stand in places you don't belong because you're going to get in the way. And I didn't want to be seen as somebody that was in the way. Like this guy's underfoot. He's an annoyance. So I'm trying to read, where do I go stand where I'm still visible and available, but I'm not in the way? And I was maybe overly conscious about that, but it ended up serving me well in the long run. But initially I'm just like, man, I feel like I'm standing in the corner and I'm irrelevant to what's going on here. And I'll never forget, I had been leading chapels. I'd been in front of the community for 2 years, doing chapel services, walking around the garage, and feeling like, man, is this going anywhere? And I can take you to the spot at Daytona International Speedway where I was standing next to a garage, and I think it was a crew chief that came by. He's like a head coach of a team. And he walked by and he stopped. And he said, "Hey, Tim, it's great to see you." And I'm thinking, this guy hasn't given me the time of day since I've been out here. It's 2 years, and all of a sudden, we're like long lost friends. And so I shook his hand, and Daytona's the first race of the year. And I'm like, wow, I've been here for 2 years, and all of a sudden it's like the cloak of invisibility had been lifted. It's what it felt like in the moment. And so I started sniffing around with the other drivers and members that were a little bit more friendly to me.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, in racing, they have a thing called seat time. For drivers, you got to be in the car driving and putting in your laps before you're kind of given that unwritten rule or opportunity to do things on the track that you need to earn. Mm-hmm. You can't just bump and do certain things on the track that an experienced racer, you got to have seat time.
Yeah.
You got to put in your laps. And so for my first 2 years, I didn't know that it was seat time for me. I just had to be out there, just grinding away and earning their trust, giving them an opportunity to know that I'm out here. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be. I'm committed to you. And those first 2 years were really challenging because I was looking for results like right now, and it was really hard when for 2 years I'm putting in time.
Yeah.
And so God opened the doors, and relationships started to happen.
It's amazing. It really goes back to even to your point in the previous question, which I think is so valuable coming out of this conversation right now, is it does take patience. And sometimes we can be, in a good way, zealous to really get into those deep gospel spiritual conversations right away. And that sometimes is great, and sometimes it's where the Lord leads. But other times there is the patience that is required to wait and to build that trust, to build those relationships, the seat time, as you mentioned so well. So I think that's really exciting to hear. I'm just curious, do you have any stories of salvation moments or gospel sharing testimonies from your time working in NASCAR?
Oh, there's so many moments where you end up interacting with I hate to call out any names. I don't want to
absolutely
put people on blast here when I've not really asked for their permission to do that. So out of respect for them, I think it's a step forward and give their own testimony. But I know there were so many moments when we would have as a tradition, and I don't know that they can do that still because the TV schedules have kind of compressed the time. Yeah. But we used to go from car to car on the grid, and we'd start at the back of the grid. That's when all the cars line on pit road before they get the green flag. And so we would go from car to car, and we would pray with every driver and his spouse or his girlfriend or crew members or whoever might be standing around with him, and just pray for safety, pray for a successful day, pray for family. And I can't tell you how many times I'd walk from car to car and thinking that they would want to pray about their success as a driver. And some would stop me and say, listen, my marriage isn't doing well. They're getting ready to get in the car and go 150 to 200 miles an hour. And they'd say, listen, I'm struggling at home. My kids aren't doing well. Me and my wife aren't getting along. I made some really bad decisions. So this happened. Man, would you just pray for me that God would either forgive me or give me wisdom on what to do next? Wow. Sometimes in tears before they pull their helmet on. I mean, it was countless times that happened. Wow. Almost every race weekend, there would be a moment or two along that grid where a driver or a crew member or a crew chief would pull me aside and say, listen, man, I'm not doing well, and I need you to pray for me. So, I don't have any faith. I've never trusted God like you're speaking about in chapel. Can I talk to you more about that? Wow. Or they would engage me right at their car about, what it means to follow Jesus. And how do I trust him? How do I invite him into my life? I know how to be a professional driver or a crew member, but I don't understand how that relationship with God works in my space. I've never thought about it before. Can we meet later? Can we go to dinner? Can we have coffee sometime and talk about it? So that it happens so many times. It's just beyond imagination. Wow. I can think of those that, before winning championships, when they would not win. They'd be second place, and they'd pull me behind their trailer and wonder, is this pursuit really what it's all cracked up to be? I mean, or after they win a championship, then it's like, wow, I caught the brass ring, but for what?
Yeah. Wow. Amazing testimonies. Something that I'm reminded of in sports like football and in NASCAR, I think you can kind of lose the personable aspect of, there's somebody in that car, right? There's a human being that's in that car. In football, there's somebody under that helmet that has a life, that has a family, that's facing challenges. And as you mentioned, NASCAR is a very dangerous sport, very challenging and dangerous sport. And how amazing is it? And I love the things you shared. So encouraged by that you were given this opportunity to be a witness for Christ in that space, where many of these drivers may have never had somebody witness to them who Christ was. And I love what you've brought up of the pre-race prayer time. The request wasn't always, hey, just help me to do well. There was other things going on that are so much bigger than sports. And that's why I love sports ministry so much. That's why I love talking to our community about things like this, because we can look at sports and elevate them so much in our lives to say, man, a championship, or working in the Power Five, or being a part of a big organization, or being a part of Hendrick Motorsports, or whatever it is. That's like where it all is. That's where my purpose is. But there's more to life. And if we can bring Christ into this industry that has such a platform, what a difference we can make for the kingdom and for his glory. So I love what you were sharing. It gets me excited about what you're able to do, and what I know is still happening across the industry and in so many ways. I'm really curious. I mean, you spent a long time being a pastor. I didn't even have this question written down, but I think it's great to discuss. You spent a long time being a pastor, and then you were in sports ministry doing chaplaincy work. How did that transition, kind of abrupt transition, refine you as an individual and a follower of Christ in your ministry?
In a church setting, so the first 12 years, I was a local church pastor, then 12 years in motorsports, and now I've been 15 years in higher ed. Very different in some ways, but in a lot of ways the same, because there's still humans involved in all of them, right? At the end of the day, we all have the same needs, the same worries and concerns, the same struggles, and but it may not always look that way until you kind of dig a little deeper into people's lives. You realize we're still insecure people as humans. We're still worried about eternity. We're still worried about our life here and whether it's going to make a difference. Is it meaningful? Are we doing something that is significant? I mean, all those questions people ask, whether they're in the pew, whether they're at the track standing next to a race car that's going to be on TV, or whether they're a student who's 18 trying to figure it out. They're all the same in a lot of ways. So now I get to look back on it, and I see so many similarities between the three. So I think for me, what it did is reminded me that, you gotta look past the exterior. You can't just focus on what an 18-year-old student might be about, with their poor decisions, or sometimes good, their poor decisions, or a celebrity that's on TV every weekend, or a successful church member, or a struggling church member. They're still humans. And to look past all of that and not get caught up on the external pieces has been the real important refinement that I needed to have in my life, because I was an athlete in high school and college, so I had my own heroes, and I thought things that were inaccurate about people that had the right uniforms on. I thought more of them than I probably should have. They were just humans that were struggling along. It's like anybody else is struggling.
Absolutely. So
that was a really valuable lesson. I think that I was a baseball player, so I have great deep affection for baseball. And it's probably why God didn't open the door in baseball quite the same way that he did within motorsports, because I didn't have the emotional connection to
Yeah.
motorsports.
Yeah.
They were just people, it happened to do a different business than I was familiar with.
Yeah.
So that was a really important thing for me to learn, that really, I think, refined me before I got to GCU. So, man, I value talking to an 18-year-old kid who's trying to figure it out as much as I did the superstar driver on TV that everybody knew and that was selling Coke or Pepsi.
Right. Yeah.
I have as much fun as talking to an 18-year-old that's trying to figure it out, who's brand new at GCU.
That's so good, Tim. That's so good. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I do think there is a reality where God is calling us to serve the lowliest, but even the affluent, right? I mean, that's what Jesus did. If you think of the rich young ruler came up to him, he didn't say, go away. Like, I don't minister to the wealthy, right? He ministered to him, right? He invited him into following him. But then he also ministered to the tax collectors and those that were poor and the widows and the prostitutes and just individuals that nobody in society wanted anything to do with. He was ministering to them as well. And so I think we have to look past titles and prestige, which I think in the Western world can be hard. I mean, if you introduce yourself to someone, what's the first thing you say? Hey, I'm Noah. This is my job, right? That's usually how we roll. So we have to look past those things and see the individual. That's a great lesson and a great takeaway. And I appreciate you sharing that. So in 2010, you made a big transition in your professional life from the role with NASCAR to becoming the campus pastor at Grand Canyon University. And besides the obvious reason of beautiful Phoenix weather, what led you to desire to transition from sports ministry to a more student-focused ministry?
Well, in all transparency, my two sons were student athletes, and our oldest had already gone to the university to play a sport. And so they had invited me to speak in a chapel service or two his first 2 years. And I had just a great time. The students resonated with some of my weird, unusual racing related stories.
Yeah.
And they had heard baseball stories and football stories, and that, but not many people are telling racing stories, back in those days, especially on a college campus. And so they kind of hit. And when the university started looking for a campus pastor, they reached out to me, and I was in my stride in my ministry in motorsports, and really felt like I had worked long and hard to get the trust of the community to be in the place that I was in. And when they reached out to me to consider being the campus pastor, I said, hey, thanks, I'm good. I've got a great role over here, and I think I better stay focused. And they circled back and said, would you reconsider? They had a couple false starts with two candidates. And so they came back and said, well, the other two candidates didn't work out. Would you reconsider? And I thought, oh, man. I said, well, send me the job description. They did. I sent it to my wife, and she looked at it. She said, hey, this sounds like you. And I thought, oh, my. All right. So the way the Holy Spirit was speaking through, my own set of circumstances, but through my wife, kind of got my attention. And then we had a son here, and a younger son on his way to come here and play as well. So I said, this will be a great moment to get off the road, because I've been traveling for, a dozen years, and I was a little bit road weary, tired of hotels and motorhomes and airports. And I thought, this would be a good way to get off the road, kind of be a helicopter, athlete parent, and I was all that, and it was super fun. I never thought much, to be honest with you, that I'm getting involved with student ministry. I came here to chase them and follow their dream. And once I got here, I fell in love with college. It had never been in student ministry. It was nothing I ever did. Yeah. And when I started, I was already a dad. So I wasn't the cool, hip campus pastor kind of guy. I was a dad. Yeah. And my sons really did bridge my introduction and my connection to the student community. They were student athletes. They introduced me to all their buddies and girlfriends around campus. And so that was kind of my introduction. I really didn't have before that any historic affection for students. It wasn't on my radar. I'd been in adult ministry from the moment I graduated college and started leaning into ministry. It was all adult stuff. And so students, I just really wasn't my thing. And here I am in a college, like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to relate to 18. I got a 19, 20-year-old and another one, in the pipeline. I don't even know how to really help them very well, let alone a whole campus full of kids. So it was a huge learning curve. And, I thought, well, I'll be here for 3 or 4 years until they're done. Then I'll bounce and go to the next thing. And, I'm still here. It's just been phenomenal.
It worked out.
I fall in love with college kids. I love them.
It's amazing. And it's so cool how God works and moves in our lives. And kind of what I mentioned earlier, sometimes he's like, hey, I'm going to take you to this group of people or this position or this place that you don't have much experience in. I'm going to use you there in some really awesome ways, make you uncomfortable even a little bit as well on the way. So that's an awesome story of how God wove that into your life. You mentioned it a little bit. You've done adult ministry for the majority of your life, and then you get into student ministry. Now, me being someone that, 4 years ago was graduating college, I can tell you that student ministry and working with people that age, man, oh man, it can be a challenge. So how did you adjust your approach, if at all, to ministering to that population of individuals who are in that stage of life of college and between 18 and 22 years of age?
I think, and I didn't take this as a philosophical operating practice. I kind of had to learn it, and then I saw it in Jesus' life. It's like, oh, well, of course, that's why he did that.
Yeah.
And part of it is being present, and the other is I think Jesus asked great questions and I think he was a phenomenal listener.
Yes.
And I think people feel understood and heard and loved when we do all of that, when we spend time with them, when we ask them questions about who they are and what they're about, what they're struggling with. And so, what I did in motorsports, because I had all kinds of questions, because I had no answers in that space. I didn't know how to live in that world. So I was always asking, well, what's that? And who's that? And what's this about? And why do they do that? So I just had to learn all kinds of things. I would ask drivers, how did you get involved in this sport? Tell me about your family. And for them, they were educating me, but they were feeling like, oh, Tim really wants to know about me, which was true.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was learning. So when I get to college, and dealing with college students, it's no different. Students, are lost in a sea of other students. And is there anybody here that really cares about me? And here's this guy that's like my dad, walk across campus. He's sitting at a picnic table or at a table in the Union, and he asked me, how am I doing? Or standing in a line at a local, eatery here on campus. And he engaged me in conversation and asked me what my major is. And all of a sudden a conversation starts up. So I think that really endeared me to students, and I fell in love with them because I could tell they were just as fearful and curious about the world that was before them, and so to have somebody that was interested in what they were thinking about their own life, about their future, really about their past, what they experienced in their home before they got here, really gave me a sense of the ministry opportunity that was here. So I don't want to get too far away from your question, but for me, that's what kind of bridged me into this space.
Yeah. Intentionality. I mean, I think that's where I've been really impressed with what you've said so far is you step into a new space, which now it's, 2 different spaces, right? You're in this NASCAR world, very niche, right? Very unique. And now you're in the student world and very different challenges, different individuals, different ways to approach it. But I love that you're willing to step into it, not with pride and, hey, I've been in ministry for this amount of years, but with humility to say, let me learn the space. Let me be patient. And I do think that's so good for all of us to really apply and say, in the spaces that I want to serve, with people that I want to engage, I really need to learn about them and what they're facing and who they are and what their background is before maybe I really get into what I want to share or really get into the ministry opportunities. And I even think of locally here in Minneapolis, we have a large Muslim population. That's a challenging group to reach and challenging group to engage with. But one of the best ways is just to get to know them, right? Be a friend, right, of a local person for these immigrants that are coming in. Let's be a friend to them. And I think that's a great way to think about it is, we need to learn the space, learn the lifestyle, learn the culture, the background in all our ministry spaces, whether it's in sports or otherwise. So I think that's a great way to fix that learning curve and understand it. That's great. I'm curious. I mean, I'm sure there's many answers to this question, but what are some of the biggest spiritual challenges and even questions that college students and Gen Z in general are facing, and how have you sought to address those questions in your ministry?
I still think the majority of college students are the same today as they were, 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. I think the vast majority of them are enthusiastic about their future, are ambitious for the next stage. They're curious about life. Sometimes they're too curious. They go down roads that teach them hard lessons. But I think a lot of college students are the same today as they were in years past. Now, society's different, as we know, with social media and technology and all that's come out of the recent past with COVID and things that we learned about what students were experiencing in school as a result of studying from home. All those things heightened certain things that we were probably aware of that has made us a little bit more manic as a society. A lot of stuff with their kids. And I think the one thing that I have seen change a bit with students coming in to university today than I did 15 years ago, being my age, I wish I could say 30 years ago when I started in higher ed, it was like this. Well, that's not the case because of the way my professional life has been. So when I started 15 years ago in higher ed, students were similar in that they still had all these ambitions for the future. But because of the impact of social media and some of, the recent things that we've been experiencing in greater society, it has changed some of the levels of anxiety that parents have for their kids going away from home or being out of their reach that has impacted their students. So social media and parenting has had a dramatic impact on students coming to university today. And I hope for those parents that are listening now that they're thinking a little bit maybe more deeply about how they're preparing their son or daughter to be launched into independent, young, emerging adulthood.
Well said.
Because a lot of parents today are really hovering and smothering their kids from basic life lessons. I mean, if your student gets to university and they do something dumb, not necessarily dangerous, but just dumb, and they're going to, get sanctioned for it, and it's going to be costly in some way, either academically or financially, let them have a student. It's okay. They're going to need to learn how to work through some of the stumbles of life. And a lot of parents want to solve every single problem that their student has. And I think that percentage of students coming to university has increased dramatically in the last 10 years. And so this isn't a parenting conversation, but it is one of the things that I've noticed that it's kind of short-circuited the maturing process for kids going off to university today. And it concerns me. I mean, not only are kids exposed to so much through social media, but because of that, I think it's heightened the anxiety and fears for parents. And they're like, man, I want to keep my arms around them a little bit longer, even while they're away at university, and sometimes the way parents will inject themselves into their kids' lives while they're in college, that, man, you need to give them a little bit more rope and let them skin their knee a little bit. They're going to be okay.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
but I get it. I mean, I was a dad. I had 2 kids that grew up, and I was worried for them. And now they're giving us grandkids. I'm still worried for them, you know.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we got to learn as parents to give our kids a little bit of rope so they can grow up on their own, be a little bit more independent. And God will give us ways to help them along the way. But sometimes we jump in too fast and too hard. And I think I've noticed that over the last decade, that has inhibited college students from maturing a little bit more during their college years than what they did when I first got here.
That's really good feedback. I can resonate with that as well, just from my perspective and different ministry opportunities I've had. And I do think there's unique challenges that are coming with the students that you're now ministering to, this wave of kind of the tail end of Gen Z, and what we're seeing, a lot of things related to social media, things, world events, current events. And I think that has affected the ways in which we do approach the gospel and tough spiritual questions and people's views of Christianity, if they're maybe lukewarm in their faith or nominal or maybe not a Christian at all. And I'm sure you've come across many of those different situations during your time at GCU. My question following that up is, what are some of your, just based on the time you spent ministering to college students for now these 15 years or so, what are some of your keys to success for effective gospel ministry to this generation in particular?
Well, I mean, I had to do this. I was never the cool young youth pastor guy when I started working with students. I was a dad, right?
Yeah.
So, and my boys made sure that I felt comfortable in my own skin. They weren't going to let me be somebody that I wasn't. I'm not a college kid anymore.
Yeah.
So working with college students, I think those of us that are adults have to be really comfortable being who we are, because college kids today, they'll sniff it out.
Oh yeah,
they'll sniff it out quick.
Yeah,
man, if you're fake or phony or trying to be somebody you're not, they will know it in a moment.
Yeah.
And so I think to minister to this generation, the Gen Z generation, I think there has to be a real level of respect for them and who they are and what their own struggles, and to be who we are. And, being on the tail end of the baby boomers, that's just who I am. Mm-hmm. And they know it. So that's one. I think the other part is, this is just true everywhere. I think sometimes we need to learn how to laugh, man. We need to learn how to enjoy, how to be with students. I just did a goofy little TikTok before my lunch before this meeting. So the students, will ask me to do, hey, there's this new TikTok trend. Will you do it? And I'm the goofiest guy to do this kind of stuff. And I have so much fun doing it. So I think, and they know, I'm game for just about anything.
Love it.
But I'm not going to try to be somebody that I'm not. If I can't pull it off, then I can't pull it off.
Yeah.
And so those are things that I've had to really just become comfortable with in order to minister to this community. Mm-hmm. It was no different than when I got to motorsports. Yeah. I didn't know anything about their world. I'll never forget this guy. I was in Birmingham at a Barber Motorsports Park, and it was a motorcycle race. And I was trying to learn about motorcycles. I thought I needed to know something about them in order to talk to drivers or riders in that case that would get on them and go 180 miles an hour. And so I was talking to this guy who was a rider, and he was a professional, a young Christian. And I was bending down next to his bike, and this is a factory-made, motorcycle. It was beautiful. Mm-hmm. And he had just got to a practice session. He asked me to come over the wall, out on the track, and as his engineer's going through it and his chief is going through it. So I'm standing there. I don't know what I'm looking at, right? It's a motorcycle.
Yeah.
I squat down behind it, and I'm looking at something. I have never seen one of these. And I asked him about it. I said, what is this? And so he explains it to me. He looks at me like, what are you asking me about that? And I said, his name was Tom. I said, Tom, I just feel like if I'm going to minister to these guys, I got to know a little bit about the bike. And he goes, no, you don't. You don't need to know anything about these bikes. We've got 10 crew members that know everything about the tires and the brakes and the motor and the this and that. We don't need the chaplain knowing about a motorcycle. We need you to know God, because that's what we need you around here for, not to talk to us about our bikes.
Well said. Wow.
And so, that gave me liberty to be ignorant. Didn't mean I didn't care about what they did as a professional. And, I would find ways to engage them about their profession. But at a certain point, I just had to be, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm lost. And with college students, it's the same thing. It's like, I don't understand, what we're talking about here. You got to explain a few things to me, because I am ignorant about a lot of things that are a part of this generation. And I want to learn, and I want them to teach me and help me to understand, so that I can be more compassionate, more appreciative of the challenges that they have. And maybe God will use that in some way.
Love that. And your last point really gave me a lot of encouragement, Tim, because I do think we need to engage with the community we're serving with, not just always in like a work mindset capacity of like, oh, I need to like just be so focused on this group in a work mindset of like, I'm doing ministry with them, but doing life with them and having fun with them and laughing with them and enjoying time with them. And I love that you brought up, sometimes like you may not understand, hey, like this group of students wants to do a TikTok. Like that's not your thing, but you engage with them because you ultimately want to show that you care and that you love them and that you're there to serve them. And it may not be your lane, and it may not be necessarily ministry, quote unquote, where you're, sharing scripture or leading a message or anything of that nature, but it is ministry in a sense of building those relationships. So great takeaway. And I think we could lighten up and be less serious. I would agree with that as well. It's a good call out. My last question for you, Tim, as we wrap up here. Many of our listeners, and our prayer as a ministry is that all of our listeners would aspire to use their careers in sports as a platform to share their faith and minister the gospel to those around them. As someone with years of ministry experience like yourself, what advice would you give them to help them lead bold and effective ministries in their workplace?
I guess to be simple and clear and to the point is really helpful when it comes to gospel ministry. I think we sometimes assume that there's too much understanding about what we already know as believers. And I don't think that the biblical literacy is as high as it once was. And we assume things of people that we talk to that may not have a whole lot of background in biblical truth. And we've got to be a little bit more simple, plain, and direct when it comes to sharing the gospel, and versus being too nuanced in the way that we try to communicate to people about the love of God, the sacrifice of Jesus, the gift of redemption, the gift of salvation. And sometimes we do it with a lot of other things. And I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's really well said. The gospel is simple. It is such a good point, Tim, because it is a simple message. There's a lot to it, right? A lot of that, a cost in the response and an understanding of our sin. I mean, it can go on and on about the specifics, but in essence, that is the core of our faith. I mean, we're close to Passion Week, and I mean, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15 that if Christ did not rise from the dead, our faith is in vain. And so I think that's a great point, sticking to the main things and keeping it simple to help others understand God's love for them in Christ and to respond to the gospel if that's the will of the Lord. So, Tim, I'm so grateful for your ministry work. I always am impressed with individuals like yourself, and it's all by God's grace, as I'm sure you would agree, that persevere through years of ministry. And we're just thankful at USG for your work, but also I'm sure our listeners are thankful for the years of service you've had in ministry. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Tim Griffin, thanks for your time today. Great conversation.
Thanks, Noah.
If you want to get involved with Uncommon Sports Group and the mission that we are on to help you navigate the sport industry as followers of Christ, Learn how you can get involved on our website at uncommonsg.org. That's uncommonsg.org. Be sure to catch a new episode of the Uncommon Podcast every other week on Thursdays at midnight Eastern Time. Until next time, we pray that you will strive to be uncommon by glorifying the name of God in whatever you may do. See you next time.